Let's take a look at graphing on TI-86 calculator. Our first one we'll take a look at is y is equal to x. And get my tablet. There we go. Well, the first thing is I need to go into the graph. And you see there's a graph button here, so that's how we go into graph mode. And then there's a y of x equals, and a button right below it. So if I go straight down below it is F1. So press F1. Now I want to put in my x key, and it's this one that says x bar. So click it. Now we want to press graph. You see graph is the second row here. To bring that down one row, I'll press the exit. You could also just press second and then F5 to access the second row, but I'll always use exit. Okay, so now we go right below it, and graph is the F6. And that would be our graph. There we go. Okay, let's say you didn't get that. Well, different reasons might be. The main one here is, see the zoom? If I press button right below it, which is F3, then choose Z standard. Z standard, the button right below it is F4. That'll set your zooming window back to your standard viewing window. That goes from -10 to +10 on your x-axis and -10 to +10 on your y-axis. Sometimes you'll get that messed up by changing some of these different settings, and that's how I'll always set it back. That's the main issue that'll happen on a TI-86 calculator, besides syntax error, which we'll talk more about later. Now you see these are taking up space. Again, you can do exit to get that menu to disappear, and exit again to get that menu to disappear. Actually, it disappeared completely there. Go back to graph. I thought exit would get you out of that, but I guess not. Obviously not. Okay, let's take a look at our next one. We're going to look at y is equal to x squared. Okay, so if you're not already in graph mode, press your graph button, and then the y equals, and press the F1 right below it. Clear clears out wherever's on that line. So press clear. Then I put my x bar in, and we got a x squared button. So I push that, and it doesn't put the x on there; it just puts the squared on there for you. I want to get to the graph, so I do an exit. Get rid of that first menu, and then I press the F5 to graph it. And that would be our graph. Let's take a look at our third basic graph, y is equal to x to the third. And the main thing I'm demonstrating here for calculator purposes is how do you graph it when you got any number up in your exponent. I don't really care about y is equal to x to the third. How do you graph it when you got x to the fourth, x to the fifth, x to the 20th? Well, if you're not already in graph mode, press your graph button. The y equals, we'll press the F1 underneath. I'll press clear to clear out that line. I'll do my x bar button. To do any exponent on your calculator, you do this caret between the divide and the clear. So press the caret, and then I'll put 3 in. And now we want to choose graph. Again, it's on the second menu up there, so I'll press exit, and then I'll press the F6 to get the graph to come up. Now the reason why I always like to do exit, because if you leave the second menu there anyway, it's going to take up space. Assuming it doesn't automatically get rid of it. I'm not an expert in TI-86. I'm just showing you the basics so you can use it in college algebra. Or in whatever class. So that'd be our x to the third. Well, let's take a look at y is equal to x to the 1/2. And again, I could care less what this graph looks like. I'm demonstrating how do you handle it when you got any fraction in your exponent. Even more than that, this is how you handle it if you got anything more than a single number or a single variable in your exponent. This is how you do it. The trick to it is to put parentheses around your exponent. Other than that, we type it in exactly as you see it. So press my y equals. Again, if you're not in graph, press graph button. So press F1 to get to that. Press clear. I do my X key, caret, beginning parentheses, 1 divided by 2, and then closing parentheses. I want to get to the graph, so I press exit one time, and then I press F5, the button below it. Now I had a flaw with the TI-86 when I was doing these, so we'll see if it occurs with these. Some of the graphs didn't work. I'm assuming because of the emulator. I got a TI-86 in a drawer, but the emulator is easier to show. So this is going to be our graph. Now the next one we're going to take a look at is y is equal to square root of x. Now again, I press my F1 to get the y equals. Press clear. Now some things are on a button, some things are above a button. You see the x squared button down here. Above it is a square root symbol. So to get to that, we'll press our second button and then the x squared. And then it puts a square root symbol on there. You always want to put a beginning parentheses. And then I want to do x. And I'll put a closing parentheses. It's always good practice whenever you work with these functions. Square root, cube root, absolute value, whatever, you put a beginning parentheses and a closing parentheses. Then I'm going to do an exit to bring that menu down, and I press F5. And that gives us our graph. You'll notice it's the same graph as the one we just did, which they should be. X to the 1/2 is the same as the square root of x. Now let's take a look at how to do the cube root of x. Now I could care less about the cube root of x. I'm demonstrating how do you handle it when you got a number in that slot. Now this slot, the number that's in there, that's called the index. And you could have 3, 4, 5 or greater. You could even have 2, but that's actually square root. You can't have 1 or less. So come over here. We're going to press our y equals. I press F1. Press my clear. I'm going to put my 3 in first. So you put your index in first. Now, if it's not on a button, it's not above a button, for graphing purposes, it's probably going to be underneath the math. And you see the multiplication symbol over here above it says math. So we'll do second, and then the times. And pops up with num, prob, angle, type, miscellaneous. Then this arrow means there's more. So if I press my more button, you see the next menu. Press more again, takes you back to this first one. Anyway, the one I want is miscellaneous. So I press F5, the button right below it. And again, I see I have an arrow here, so I press more to get over there. And then you got this radical with an X for what, it's kind of hard to tell by the picture, but it's for the index. So I press F4 to get that. Now I put a beginning parentheses in, I put in my X, and then I'll put my closing parentheses. Okay. Now I want to exit to get rid of that menu. And I want to get to the graph, so I'm going to exit one more time, and then the graph. You shouldn't sit here and memorize these buttons. You should just get used to working with the menus, because your menu system might be different than mine. You might be at a different point when you've selected something. Okay, so I want to choose F5 for the graph. And that would be our graph. I can freehand draw it very well. Let's see what's our next one. I showed the cube root, but fourth root the same way. You just put 4 in first. Absolute value. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so I'm gonna come over here. I'll press my y equals the F1. Press clear. Now we're gonna go to the math. So I'll do second times, and this is underneath the num menu. So I press the F1 axis num, and then over at the far right here you see ABS. So I'll press F5 to get to the ABS. Now I'll put a beginning parentheses. You should always put the beginning parentheses, and then X, and then my closing parentheses. Now when I get to the graphs, I press exit, take that menu down, exit one more time, and then the F5 to get to the graph. Okay. And that gives us this graph right here. Now our next one, I think it's x plus 2 over x minus 3. Yeah. X plus 2 over x minus 3. I could care less what this graph looks like. I'm demonstrating how do you work with fractions in general with your calculator. Anytime you have more than a single number or a single variable on top or bottom of a fraction, you have to put parentheses around that part. So since we have more than a single number or a single variable on top, I'll put parentheses around the top. And since we have more than a single number or single variable down here, I'll put parentheses around the bottom. Now it doesn't hurt to put parentheses automatically. Even if you have a single x up here, if you can put parentheses around it, doesn't hurt anything. Now other than that, we just enter in as you see it. So I go to my y equals, I press my F1, press my clear, I'll do a beginning parentheses, x plus 2, closing parentheses, divided by, beginning parentheses, x minus 3, closing parentheses, and I want to get to the graph, so I'll do exit, bring that menu down. Or again, you can do second and then the F5 to access that second. Let me show it. Second, F5. Looks like it gets rid of the second menu anyway then. That's nice. That vertical line should not be there. That's a flaw with the calculator. So your graph is everything but that. And I don't know, it's something like that, I think. Close as I'm gonna get. Let's take a look at our next one. I think this is one with a lot of negatives. Let's see. Yeah. Y equals a dash, square root, dash, x dash 3. Now on some calculators this doesn't matter which one you use, but on some of them it does. So just as a general practice, I'm going to give you some guidelines that should help you on any calculator. You have 2 dashes here. You have this one in the very bottom row, that's your negative. Then you have this one on the right side, which is your minus. If the first dash is the first in whatever, then it's a negative. Like this dash is the first in my problem, so this would be a negative. This dash here is the first in my square root, so this will be a negative. Now instead of being the first in whatever, it's between 2 items. Well, this one's between the x and the 3. Then it's a minus. Now, this right here, you might say, well, that's between the square root and the x. Yeah, but it goes against our first guideline I gave you. If it's a first in whatever, it's a negative. Other than that, we're going to enter it as you see it. So I'm going to press my F1 to get in the y equals, press clear, put in my negative, and then I want square root. Remember the square root is above your x squared, so I do second x squared. Put a beginning parentheses for my square root, then I put in my negative, x minus 3, and then a closing parentheses. Now when I get to the graph, so I'll do an exit, and press F5. And that's our answer. and it looks like this. Okay, let's go change it a little bit. I'll press my F1 to go back to y equals. I'm going to use my right arrow key, put my flashing cursor on a negative before the x, and change it to a minus. Let's see what happens. Press exit, and then I'll press F5. We get a syntax error. Whenever you get syntax errors, you should always choose go to. You see the go to right below it is F1. So I press F1. It not only goes to where the line where the problem is, but it puts the flashing cursor on the problem, and so then you can change it back to whatever else, whatever it should be. Now you're saying, well, what's a big deal then? If you put the wrong dash, it'll tell you, and you can just change it. Well, sometimes. Let me come here to this minus. Let me put a negative here. Now let's graph it, and actually, let me press enter. Let's go back to our graph. I forget it doesn't throw you in graph mode. Press y equals, and you see it's now a negative. Now if I do an exit and bring that menu down, choose F5 for graph, no longer gives us a syntax error, just gives us the wrong graph. Now that's frustrating. Comes test time and you think you've typed in your calculator perfect, and you just get the wrong graph. Well, if I go back to y equals and change that negative back to what it should be, because it's between the x and the 3, it should be a minus. Now if I do an exit to bring that menu down, I press F5 for graph. Let me get back to what it should be. So again, have to know what those dashes represent in the problem in order to get the correct graph on the TI-86. It's not true of all calculators, but it is this one. Now our last one. Let's take a look at this. We got y is equal to x to the power of x squared minus 3x plus square root of x. The reason why you learn all these basic building blocks is so that you can graph more difficult problems in college algebra. I know a lot of these basic graphs, you might already know what they look like, and you say, well, why do I need to do this? I know what the sketch of this looks like to begin with. The idea is to take these basic building blocks and merge them together, come up with a more complex graph. Now, first thing I noticed this is I got more than a single number or a single variable in my exponent. Remember, we had to put parentheses around the exponent then. Other than that, we pretty well type it in as we see it. So, back to my calculator here, and I'll press my y equals. So the F1, press clear. I got my x, and then I want a power, so I do a caret. Beginning parentheses for the exponent. Then x squared, so I do x bar, x squared, minus 3x, so 3 and then x bar, plus, and then the square root. So I'll do second x squared to get square root. Now put the beginning parentheses for the square root, put the x bar, closing parentheses for the square root, closing parentheses for the exponent, and then exit. And then I will press F5 for graph. Slow. There it goes. Oops. Something like that right there. Okay. Now, what's the need for this? Let's say previous class, you plotted points. You were happy with plotting points. You loved it, actually. You're the best point plotter there was in your class. Everybody else was happy with 9 or 10. Or happy with 3, and you had to have 9 or 10. Well, we know what this graph looks like. This is the parabola. It's the U-shaped graph like that. Or is it? Maybe the graph looks like this. It's a heart shape. You just didn't graph enough points. If you graphed enough, you would have saw that. Maybe he's come up here, passed through those points, come back down over here. These passes through these points, comes back down over here. Maybe this comes back down over here at x equals 500. If you had just plotted 500 points in your t-chart, you would have saw it come back down. Obviously, plotting points has some real flaws. The only time plotting points works well is when you already know what the graph looks like. Well, think what I'm saying there. You already know what the graph looks like. Now, there's some problems with the TI-3 or TI-86. Remember which calculator I'm showing here. Obviously, if my viewing window looks like this, I'm not seeing it come back down. Well, we'll see a leading coefficient test, which helps a little bit in that. But for the most part, it's a much better than plotting points. It gives us a little clearer picture of what's going on, but it still isn't perfect. If you go on and take Calc 1 or Business Calc, you'll learn techniques that help you to see it coming back down and understand what the true picture of the graph looks like. Now, that's graphing on a TI-86 calculator.